Hey folks, my name is Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery, and today we're doing something a little bit different because we're doing a full small details review on a fixed blade. Because of that, and also because of some reasons we'll talk about in just a moment, I actually also filmed a bunch of footage out in my kitchen. That's something I've never done before, so that's a fun first for the channel. Anyway, this is the SRK LeBlanc, and that's Self Reliant Knives. Self Reliant Knives is a production knife company, if you will. We'll talk all about what that means in a moment, but it's a knife company by a guy named Cliff Averill. I think it's Averill, maybe it's Averill, I don't know, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. He's a guy with a background in steel fabrication, and now he's a part-time knife maker in Arizona. And the knife is called LeBlanc because it is named after Alex LeBlanc, who's just a really cool guy. He's an EDC enthusiast, and he struck up a conversation with Cliff about the possibility of maybe getting a custom knife made to his specs. And what that turned into is a 16-month process, a bunch of prototypes and back and forth iterations, and ultimately they collaborated on this design, and thus it's named after Alex. Now, this is what Cliff is calling a production knife, quote unquote production knife, but it's kind of really hard to say what that means because this is largely a one-man shop, single-person knife. Like, okay, the blanks were waterjet, I think in Arizona. The heat treat was done by Peters in Pennsylvania, but everything else is done in-house. The grinding, the sharpening, the handle construction entirely, and the sheaths are all made in-house by Cliff. So is this a production knife in your mind, or this is pretty freaking close to a complete one-man custom? I mean, I guess you could maybe call it a mid-tech. Anyway, how did this knife come by me? So I'm not a fixed blade guy, and Alex knows that. He's watched my channel. He's aware of the fact that I'm not really into fixed blades, but he messaged me anyway asking if I'd want to check this out because he said he'd appreciate my overall design feedback and whatnot. And at first, I mean, I'm incredibly flattered. That's tremendously flattering. But at first I was like, wow, man, do I really have anything I could say about this? But then we started talking about what the design is actually like and the overall size and the steel it's made out of and what it's designed for and everything. And I realized that I don't have a lot of experience with fixed blade knives in the like outdoors and EDC space, but I actually do have a lot of experience with fixed blades knives that are pretty similar in the kitchen. A lot of people don't know this, but I actually spent 7 or 8 years buying and selling I'd say entry-level, high-end Wusthof, Henkel's, Global, Miyabi, that kind of stuff. Kitchen knives as a side hustle just to make some money back in college. And I also am an avid cook. So I actually have quite a lot of knowledge and experience working with things like these paring knives. And the reality is that's immediately what I think this struck me as what I think this is. This to me is a all-purpose, to go with a sheath paring knife. Yes, it's being billed as an EDC knife, absolutely. And I do genuinely think it would work really, really well for that. I did put this through a bunch of cardboard, but there's a reason why that's not what I chose to focus on. I decided to treat this as a paring knife, partly because my experience with that and my experience in the kitchen, and also because if you want to know how this operates as an EDC knife, there's actually a lot of really good content on this, literally this exact knife. This particular one happens to be the first one that was ever made. It's Alex's personal knife, and this exact knife has already been on both Stasa 23's channel and Neve's Knives, and those are both fantastic channels. There's zero odds that you know my channel and don't know theirs already, but where my content is typically around like the design and theory of a knife, their content is very around like the experience of the knife, and that's awesome. So if you want to see a bunch of footage of this out in the woods whittling sticks, go watch Stasa's video. It's fantastic. If you want to watch a bunch of footage of this breaking down a bunch of cardboard, go watch Neve's video on it. And so I thought, okay, I don't need to film it. I don't need to do that again. You can already see that they did a really, really good job and talked about how it performed there. And spoiler alert, it performed fantastically. But if I owned this knife, what I would do with it is I would take it camping. I would take it and do food prep with it. I would. And partly that's because this is in LC200N. We'll get that in just a moment. But yeah, as a result, I bought a bunch of produce that I would use to make skewers if I was out camping and wanted to do some roasting of some vegetables and stuff. And so I filmed a bunch of footage of me prepping stuff in the kitchen and compared it to a standard paring knife and a thinner paring knife. And I also compared it to the only other fixed blade I have. This is the BMKT EDC1 field spec, because this is also something that I plan to take camping with me to do food prep. Let's go jump to that. Okay, we're in the kitchen now. This is all kind of oriented weirdly for me. I'm gonna be cutting like this direction. Normally I'd have this all sideways, but you know, camera rigs are what they are. So this is our SRK LeBlanc, and this is a much more standard paring knife. This is a Zwilling J.A. Henkel's Pro S line. This is their standard 3-inch paring. And these are actually really comparable grinds. So the blade stock on this is 96 thousandths, just under 0.1 inches. The blade stock on this is much, much thinner. This is 65 thousandths, but the reality is this is a much shorter grind. And these both come to the same about 15, 16 thousandths behind the edge. And so if you actually measure how thick this blade is at the height of this grind, it's 75 thousandths there. This is 65 thousandths. What that means is that the front part of this blade's geometry is actually almost identical to this paring knife. And what that means is that it's going to cut basically the exact same as this paring knife, as long as you're not going above this first part of the blade. It's like right about there where this other blade would end, and where this is 75 thousandths. And so something like this carrot, you can see if we're cutting up here at the end, this is just about that height. Anything down below, and it's going to be completely interchangeable with how this one's going to cut. The other thing we're going to look at here, this is my BMKT field spec. This is another knife that I would consider something I would take camping to do some basic food prep. This is in M390. This is in LC200N. This is in whatever that X50 CRMOV15 steel that they use. Okay, the other thing we're going to compare this to is this. This is a Victorinox stamped paring knife, and this thing is insanely thin. This thing is 48 thousandths behind the edge up here. Sorry, 48 thousandths at the spine, and 8 thousandths behind the edge. Now, the big difference between these, the really big difference between these is flexibility. Something that's this thin and in this kind of steel is going to be very flexible. And so if you do need to get into weird corners or kind of use it as if it was a fillet knife and let it flex a little bit, you can do that. This one here is going to be the exact same steel. These are both in that same X50 CRMOV15 steel, which is, like, again, this is effectively Germany's original version of 5CR. This is going to be somewhat flexible. You can see, yeah, it's not super flexible, and it's just, even it's the exact same steel. This one is going to have a different heat treatment. Zwilling does their whole, they even say right on there, it's the Freodor ice hardening, so their heat treatment is going to be slightly different. But it's also just, it's a bigger, thicker piece of metal, so it's not going to be as flexible. This one up here at this point, now LC200N has some good toughness to it, good flexibility in that regard, and it's just a much thicker piece. So this does have a little bit of flex to it, as you would expect from a knife of this thinness, but it just isn't very flexible. Okay, so lastly, this M390, yeah, this is, there's no flex to this basically whatsoever. I mean, yeah, none. Okay, let's cut up something like a carrot. Now, at this little point down here where these are so thin, this is going to cut tremendously easily. There's no real snapping. What I'm much more curious to see is if this breaks or if it actually cuts all the way cleanly through up here at the thicker spot. So you can see it actually cut all the way to there. So this is the part it cut, and this is the part it broke. And that is actually really, really good. So I was expecting this to get, where did that get to? Yeah, okay, so where that lines up with on this carrot, if we look at that, that means that this cut all the way cleanly through without breaking, all the way up to that top line, where this one would have just completely cleared the bit. And so this tiny little bit extra where it started to wedge, I mean, a little bit thicker at the top is what started to make this snap instead of slice. Let's see if we can do another version of that. Just pushing straight down in. Yep, exact same thing again. It slices up until it hits there. So now on carrots, I actually like to cut these crossways. And that cuts so freaking easy. Okay, comparing that to the actual one over here. This one of the things, if you're used to using a chef's knife, there's a grip that you use where you put your fingers on the item you're cutting, and then you're sliding the knife against your fingers themselves, this plane that the fingers make. And one of the things with a paring knife, the reason why you don't use a paring knife for these types of tasks normally, but you would if it's the only knife you had because the only knife you brought camping, is that this knife is just too short in this direction to really fit cleanly. Because once I get down here, it goes underneath my front knuckle. And so this I can't do the same sliding motion. I have to kind of hold my fingers back a little bit more and to brace the item and do more of this kind of cut. Honestly, these feel, yeah, these feel almost identical in how they're cutting. If I swap over to this super duper thin thing, yeah, with this, it feels like I could make paper thin cuts. This thing is just so incredibly flexible. Let's switch over to a different item. Okay, so now we're going to cut up some stuff that I would put on a grill. Something if I was going to be, I will actually go outside and use this on my grill in just a little bit. But if I was camping, this is something I would put on like skewers in order to make, skewers over a fire pit or something like that. So let's get going. Now, I'm not used to cutting in this weird thing under the angle, so you can see that I'm making really inconsistent sizes of slices, but wow, the actual cutting itself is tremendously easy. Let me throw some of this in a bowl. I feel like I'm on a Martha Stewart-style cooking show now. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, that works so well. Nothing is sticking, that slices so well. So back over to this guy now. You do get this sense that this is cutting a little bit easier, and it's just that thinner overall blade stock. You can feel the added resistance of this as you go. But my God, does it cut easily. What other one would I want to try? I really don't like the experience of cutting stuff like this with this. This is so thin and flexible that it just feels wrong and like it's not really going where I want it to. I really only use a knife like this if I'm trying to get inside of a jalapeno pepper and core it out or something like that. Let's switch over for a moment and try and use this one. This is much thicker. This is 0.13 blade stock, 130 thousandths instead of 96 thousandths. And it's the same 15 thousandths on the edge down here, but this one has an only 0.75 inch tall grind, and it's a shorter grind and it gets to a much thicker blade stock. So can we even tell the difference here? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So this still cuts super duper well. If this is what you're taking out into the field, it's going to work perfectly great, but you can definitely feel this is flexible stuff. So it's easy to have it push to the side. I'm curious if I bring this back out, grab another carrot. Okay. Yeah. That's only cutting to there and then splitting. Okay. It did a little bit better. It's cutting to there and then splitting. Okay. So this is cutting right about to the point where both of these is cutting right about to the point where that grind ends, and then as soon as it's hitting the full thickness, it's just wedging and splitting it open. Okay, let's switch over to a bell pepper. This is the kind of thing that I would absolutely bring camping with me and put on some skewers. So let's cut this guy open. Now, one thing out of the bat, you can see that this blade isn't actually thick enough to completely clear a bell pepper. So what I'm gonna have to do is cut around. Worked just fine. Take this top part, cut this into chunks to put on my skewers. Get back in frame. Super duper easy. Yeah, that is so freaking easy with this knife. This works so well as a paring knife. Now let's get this open, put these down, and cut some chunks to put on my skewers. Oh, gorgeous. Yeah, I'm loving cutting with this knife. So what's another thing we might cut? This is a pink lady apple. This is another case where the blade isn't really long enough to completely clear this apple. It might actually be. Let's see if I can cut this apple in half. Yeah, it didn't actually split at all. This is just a clean cut. That worked super duper easy. If I hold this in my hand, how well can I pair with it? I don't normally do that with a half an apple. It's a little bit weird to hold that. Oh yeah. Cuts like a dream. Obviously, it's not how I normally cut up an apple, but little bite-sized pieces works great. The length means that I can't cut all the way through like this. Well, let me see if I can. Yeah, you can see I didn't quite clear the end. So maybe I would do something like this. Cut one half, turn it around, find my slice. That's one of the downsides of a smaller knife, but you know, if this is all you can fit in your pack or something like that, makes sense. Now this is gonna be an interesting test. This is supposed to be a yellow sweet onion. It looks very white. It's gonna be an interesting test because onions are very hard. They're prone to cracking rather than slicing. And normally if you're going to cut something like this up, if you were to dice it, you'd want a very thin blade. I think this would actually work well. But for this, I'm going to cut it up to put on skewers for my grill. And so it's going to be a different kind of cut. Let's get the end off of that. And I'm going to cut this in half. This is another one of those things where I don't have the ability to do it all in one single cut, but it was really easy to split it over into two. So for this, ooh, this outer layer is very green. Let me get that bit off. Sure, okay. So what I'm gonna do with this is cut that back bit off. I'm gonna cut this down like this. Turn the whole thing sideways and cut. Yeah, working with a whole onion at this size. There's a reason why I don't ever do this with a paring knife, but it worked quite easy, and I've got slivers like this to fit onto my skewers. Yeah, that went tremendously easily. This cut through super, super easily. This is very much a knife I would take camping. It will do, it's not gonna be the easiest compared to like an 8-inch chef's knife, but if this is what you can take camping, I think you'll be quite happy. Let's do the other half now. Super easy. The last thing we're gonna cut up is some mushrooms to put on the skewers. You can see this whole time that my hand is getting wet. I've been rinsing it off if I get like oniony stuff on it. And so I'm using this micarta in a wet state, and it still has plenty of like kind of gummy level grippiness to it. I wouldn't want to be doing something that would really try and rip this out of my hand, but honestly, this still is in my hand. Actually, wow. Yeah, this is in my hand pretty darn well, even with it being completely wet. So let's cut the ends off of these. And I'm going to just, let me think. Depending on the size, I think I'm either going to cut them in half or quarter them or like thirds them. So like this one's pretty big. I'm going to cut this one in quarters. Stick those on the skewers. This one's a little bit smaller. No, I think I'll still do those in half. Yeah, wow, this is so tremendously easy. This is basically a perfect paring knife. Just finish up a few more. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm all done and I just finished cleaning everything up. I used some soapy water on the blade and I just used regular water, rinse off any juices that were on the handle. And I don't have any qualms with doing that whatsoever because this is LC200N or Zefinite, and this is effectively completely unrustable. Much more so even than the stuff that's in this literal kitchen knife. And the other thing I want to point out is that the way that the, let me get my centering there, the way that the handles meet the blade is so flush that I'm not worried about any water getting up in there. Now, if it did get up in there, it wouldn't matter from a rust perspective because there's nothing on this that is rustable. But you would, be concerned about moisture being trapped in there just causing mold or something like that. But this is so cleanly joined, so seamless, there's no opportunity for water to seep up in. So yeah, super duper practical knife in the kitchen or at the campsite. Okay, we are back. And as I said in that, the reality is that the geometry on these two blades is tremendously similar for the portions that are actually the same size. This is just under 0.1 inch blade stock. It's 0.0965, and this thing is down here at 0.065. That's 0.0965 and 0.065, 0.03 difference. But if you measure the thickness here at the height of this, This one's 0.065, and this is 0.075. So they're actually tremendously similar geometry, the entire path up. This one just ends earlier. And as you saw in the video, that does mean that because you end up with a smaller amount of steel here trying to push through stuff, it doesn't wedge, it doesn't break through the carrot, for example, as much. But for that entire portion until we get to there, these things cut interchangeably. And so, yeah, I think the overall profile here, everything about this blade shape and everything makes a fantastic food prep knife. This is a really, really good, really good paring knife. This blade steel is, like I said, LC200N. It's listed as being Z-finite or Z-finite, but those are the exact same thing. It's a steel made by Zap, a German precision metals company, founded in the 1700s, been around forever. And LC200N and Z-finite or Z-finite are the exact same thing. I think technically should be pronounced Z-finite because it's just a portmanteau abbreviation. It literally stands for Zap fine grain nitrogen steel, finite. And yeah, it's just a trade name. They are the exact same thing. But the reason why that's so freaking good for a knife that you're going to use in a food preppy kind of situation is because it's practically impossible to rust. So are these, but this is basically 5CR. It is. So Henkel's and Victorinox both use X50 CR MOV15, and that is the German original version of the Chinese cloned 5CR15 MOV. And I've heard somewhere that Victorinox might be using X55, but that's nearly the exact same thing. That just would mean that there's 0.55% carbon instead of 0.5. Both of these companies advertise this as being high carbon steel. And it's just plain not. It's like mid-carbon steel. Most definitions of high carbon is 0.6 and up, and usually goes up to about 2. And so these just aren't. But the reality is neither is this. Like this has 0.3% carbon. It's a totally different steel basis, though. And so this it's not like LC200N is some amazing edge retention super steel. It has pretty good edge retention, but the reality is that it's just a perfect corrosion resistant steel. This is one of those nearly truly impossible to corrode steel. So if you are going to be out getting it wet in a stream, rinsing it off in a stream, or prepping food and you're not going to be able to wipe it off easily or clean it easily, or if you're doing something that you're going to get juices on it, anything like that, like this steel won't rust on you, and that makes it ideal for that kind of circumstance. Other things talking about this blade, the kind of stuff I would more normally talk about. What we have here is a spectacularly executed plunge grind. This is the kind of plunge that you would find on something more like a Spyderco, where it's not a concave plunge whatsoever. The thing taking it from the full thickness down to the thinnest behind the edge is just a cliff drop off. But they do have this sharpening tool. It's something that Spyderco doesn't normally do on their knives. The end result is that this gives you plenty of room to sharpen, and this knife itself has already been sharpened by both Stasa and Jared. The edge on this shiny mirrory edge is definitely a Jared edge. Now, talking about that edge for a moment, in Jared's video, he said that he ran into what felt like a burnt edge on this. And that is something that Cliff has made adjustments. He's now using water cooling while he's doing his edge grinding. So presumably that will be better in later versions of that. If we come back up to the top, we have excellent jimping here. I absolutely love this. It's placed farther forward, which means it works perfectly for where your finger actually lands if you're trying to use this in the kind of pinch grip where you're putting your finger on the top. Now, if you're doing food prep, often you're going to hold the knife in this kind of pinch grip. And if you saw in the video, one of the things that was really nice is that this blade is just tall enough that I can still use it in that slide against my finger style chopping. But in this kind of pinch grip, this isn't going to impact you whatsoever. But if you're doing this style of pinch grip, which is super, super common, this is exactly where you want. And I love this jimping. It is exactly the kind you want where it is shallow enough and these top crests are big enough that it doesn't hurt at all to press on, but it catches you so well. I will say, I think they could have pulled this all the way back. I don't want them to scoot it back. I just think they could extend this all the way back. In my hands, one of the most common ways that I grip knives is I pick them up and I hold them like this, which is basically a saber grip, but instead of being here where my thumb is as on that jimping spot, the entire knife is canted forward slightly. And in that grip, I don't touch that jimping whatsoever. And it's fine. Like, I don't feel like I'm sliding around. And if I do slide forward at all, I immediately hit that. But since this is the kind of jimping that is very comfortable and isn't a problem at all, they could have put it back here and you would have had a little bit less of a slippery time. Now, these handles are also reasonably, it's interesting. They're made of, no, this is Chili micarta. The liners are black G10, and it's the kind of micarta that isn't textured at all. I think you could potentially find this a little bit slippery, but honestly, it has this kind of almost waxy feel to it. And the result is that I don't find this sliding around in my hand. You could slide, but I grip it pretty darn well. And so I feel pretty good about the grip in that. The overall ergonomics feel so nice. This is a thin handle. And I do think my one suggestion for overall design is to make the back of this a little bit thicker. Maybe even through here, just the back portion of this is a little bit thicker because it just feels a little bit thin in my hand. I have the same kind of general feeling about this one, and this one's even a little bit thinner. On both of these, I think that the back being a little bit thicker would just make it feel a little bit more, I don't know, this is never going to be a hand-filling knife, but I'm not complaining because this knife really does feel great. This little swell right here gives you a great kind of indexing spot. Your finger nestles in it really, really well. The balance on this knife is basically right where this nub is. If we look right there, it is, yeah. And the end result is that's basically perfect. This is a knife that feels really balanced in your hand. I think they did a really good job of giving you enough handle and enough blade in a way that makes it so you feel like you really can use this tip for precision stuff, which is perfect if you're trying to cut out the veins or bones in chicken or something like that. But it gives you enough space that you still can do like chopping. And I love the way this feels in my hand. This is a 3.5 inch amount of steel sticking out, but only a 3.2. The list is 3 1/4, but I measured at 3.205 inches of sharpened edge. And that means that it is plenty big for if you're doing, I don't know. I think it's a really, really nice range for a fixed blade. I know that some people want their fixed blades to be 4 inches or more, depending on what they're kind of doing with it. But this is meant to be small, nimble, something that you can do fine detail work, something that you can tear through cardboard with, or that you can cut through whittle sticks with, or something like that to make feather sticks for starting a fire. But it's small enough that this really does kind of disappear. And I think they did a very, very nice job with that. The handle is 3.91 inches, 3.917, 3.92, just under 4. And in my medium glove size hands, I think it's a really nice length. I think that if you have, I have enough room here that I can stretch out a little bit. And if you have bigger hands, I think you just end up rolling off the back just a little bit. And this curve back here, it just feels so good. There's really only 2 things that I would recommend that they change. I said that hand, but if let's say they kept everything else exactly the same, there's only 2 spots on this that kind of irk me. And they're both right here. And basically what it comes down to is this is a complete 90-degree angle right here, and these corners are all kind of sharp. And under normal kind of hammer or saber grips, you're not going up on that. This isn't a full-on finger guard, but this is not the kind of knife that you're meant to be stabbing into a hard surface. Under normal use, this curves down enough that it's definitely going to prevent your hand from sliding up, but don't try to risk that. But where I'm going is that if you're holding this in the kind of more chef's knifey pinch grip where you're up on the blade like this, and then my finger wraps around this point, and it's just a hard little jabby point. All these corners are just kind of sharp. And so if this were my own personal knife, I would take a diamond file. You could also do the same thing with a sharpening stone or something like that, and I would just add my own little tiny chamfer. Now, that's a reflection of how the edge finishing is on this entire knife. This is a crisp edge up here. There's no chamfer. Some people will want that for an EDC knife that they might take out camping, because if you are taking this camping, you sometimes want a crisp edge for using a fire or a ferrous rod for starting a fire or something like that, and you could use that there, right there as well. Sometimes I find that crisp edges right here suck in a pinch grip because I'm pressing against it. I honestly never noticed that when I was using this. And oh, by the way, like I filmed all that footage and then I continued using this in my kitchen for the entire next week because Alex encouraged me to do so. And it's not that I did a ton of work in my kitchen, but I did use this every single time I went into the kitchen. And I never once noticed that this bugged me in any kind of pinch grip, but that spot did. The other thing that I would say about this is this little spot right here. Now you can see that this is getting all kind of worn down right there. And why is that? It has to do with how it fits into the sheath. And I don't think this is something I would really encourage them to change about the knife, but more about the sheath. And the thing, I'm a little bit hesitant to say this right now because the sheath has changed some, so this might actually not be a problem on future ones. I don't find this corner here to be unpleasant anyway, and I wouldn't change that. But if you look at what's going on when it presses into the sheath, that spot is digging into this sharp edge right here. And so the result is when you slide this into the sheath, that hard edge is pushing over that spot. Like right now I have it wedged right up on that. You can see that that hard thing is wearing on that. And so it's this corner in the sheath that's actually causing that wear. So this is the other thing that I would do. If I owned this particular knife and this came exactly how this came, I would just take a file and grind down this little edge right there. That won't impact your retention whatsoever because that's all being held in place by this shape here and this kind of come down here. I would just literally knock off this tiny little bit. Let's talk about this sheath finally because this sheath is actually fantastic. This is a taco style sheath. The other kind that you frequently find is a pancake style sheath, whether if it's two sheets that are pressed together then riveted along the sides, or if it's one sheet that's folded over. This is something that Cliff is making entirely in-house. He sources the kydex locally and he does it in-house, and it works really, really well. Over here, I like this sheath. This sheath was made by Best Tech, and I think they did a really good job. It has absolutely no rattle and has really pretty nice retention, but like, look, this is what you're pressing off against. If you're trying to like the push off spot, it's thicker, so it's not bad. In fact, I find it very, very comfortable, but look at over here. He's done this really great job of curling this up around, and it puts this wonderful little nub, and I love it. It's so easy to push off, even though the fact that this has pretty crisp retention. Now, I said that this has changed a little bit, and one of the things that he's done is he's pulled this angle in a little bit more steeply, and that might, in and of itself, already remove this problem. But the other reason is that he was trying to just normalize the retention, and this particular one, because the retention is partly about how much this comes down right there, this one has pretty firm retention. You can hear that snap. It's very, very firm. I find it very easy to put this on. You just have to be forceful about it. But it pops in with such good authority and does pop off really well. It does ship with these soft loops, but it also ships with a tech lock. And you can mount these in, any different orientation, up, down, left, side, scout carry, all the fun things. I never once tried, I played with this. It works nicely, but I never tried actually mounting this on anything. I did try putting this in my belt. It works really well. These are the kind that pop off if you need to. These are snaps, and then it's screw attachment right there, and you do have different spots depending on how thick you want to make it. This overall thing, I didn't mention this earlier, but this is a 2.67 ounce knife by itself. Now you throw this exact configuration on, the tech lock version is going to add even more weight, but this version of the sheath with the straps, and you're only at 4.6 ounces, 4.59. And so you are adding 2 full ounces with just this, but this part's going to be stuck on your belt. This isn't coming with you. This in here, when you have it in hand, 2.6 ounces, this thing is so lightweight. It's so easy to hold and use. And you add this all together and you're still at a thing that's only 4.6 ounces. This is a no-brainer if you're going camping, unless you're doing like ultra lightweight backpack camping, and then something in the 4.6 ounce range might be too much for you. Let's kind of wrap up by talking about the overall fit and finish, because this is a fixed blade. I can't get into all of the things I normally talk about action and how like the detent lines up and everything like that. So let's talk about the general construction and fit and finish. This thing is really, really nicely done. The curves here, the mating of the handle scale material to the steel itself, it's all so well finished off. The kind of radius along here is so smooth and flush. It feels so nice in your hand. This rounding back here, it all just feels great. I think I think they kind of really nailed what they're going for, which was to be a completely stainless small EDC knife that you could use for like fishing or for food prep at a campsite, or to carry around your house and use for breaking down boxes and opening packages and whatever your personal EDC is. I think they really kind of nailed it on that. This knife is, I think these sold for $180 as part of kind of like a preliminary drop. I believe if he drops more of these, they're going to go up in price. I think over 200. It might even be 220. Now, what does that mean to you? And what is this worth to you? If you look at comparable knives like that, they're all that's a really pretty reasonable price not for this knife, especially if you're talking about this kind of blade steel and this kind of general quality level and construction. And when you take into the fact that this is effectively, yeah, it's a production knife, but it's effectively a single guy in his shop doing this all. I think that's a very reasonable thing. I think that if you're in the market for a small EDC fixed knife, or like me, if you're in the market for a knife to throw in your backpack when you go out and camping, I think this is kind of perfect for you. I think we're going to wind it up there. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Huge thank you to Alex for sending this to me to check out. I really, really appreciate it. I don't know if I'm going to start reviewing more fixed blade knives, but this is fun to kind of push myself in this direction a little bit further. And it was definitely fun filming some weird stuff out in the kitchen. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.